All right, I'd like to call to order the December 5th special meeting of the Murrieta City Council is now called to order. And if we could do a roll call, please.
Councilmember Warren.
Here.
Councilmember Lavelle. Councilmember Holliday.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stone.
Here.
Mayor DeForest.
Here.
Let the record reflect that all members are present with the exception of Councilmember Lavelle.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. Are there any public comments on agendized items?
Seeing none.
Thank you so much. Madam City Clerk, will you please go over the closed session agenda?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As listed on the agenda, the City Council will meet in closed session. CS1, Conference with Legal Counsel, threat of litigation. The City Council will conduct a closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2 due to a significant exposure to litigation in one case.
Thank you so much. Madam City Clerk, we will now recess into our special meeting and return back at
Approximately 4 o'clock, and you will let me know
if we need to go over.
if you need more time.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. I would like to note for the record that the City Council remains in closed session under the special 3 o'clock meeting, and I anticipate them to return with a report out on or around 4:30 p.m. Thank you.
Now reconvening from our special closed session, and we will adjourn our special meeting when we return from our closed session after our regular council meeting. So,
To clarify, we're going to continue the closed session after the conclusion of the regular meeting. So the mayor's adjourning it now until that point in time.
Understood.
Thank you.
And I would like to note for the record that Councilmember Lavelle was present during the special meeting closed session item.
The entire time.
Okay, thank you.
all right. And now I'll call to order the December 5th meeting, Murrieta City Council. I'll call to order and roll call. Madam City Clerk?
Councilmember Warren.
Here.
Councilmember Lavelle.
Here.
Councilmember Holliday.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stone. Mayor DeForest.
Here.
Let the record reflect that all members are present with the exception of Mayor Pro Tem Stone.
Thank you so much, Madam City Clerk. Are there any public comments on closed session items only?
Seeing none, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And then we'll go over the closed session
Thank you.
agenda, please.
Yes, thank you. As listed on the agenda, the City Council will meet in closed session on one item, CS Conference with Legal Counsel, Anticipated Litigation. City Council will conduct a closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2 because there is a significant exposure to litigation in one case. I would like to note that the agenda originally had 2 cases listed, but it is only one being heard.
Thank you so much, Madam City Clerk. With that, we're going to go into recess, into closed session, and then we'll reconvene at 5 p.m. for our workshop.
And I just wanted to note that Councilmember Stone is upstairs. She'll be participating in the closed session. She just didn't come downstairs for the report out.
All right, good evening. I'd like to call to order the December 5th workshop of the Murrieta City Council, and we'll call this to order. Roll call. Will Madam City Clerk please call roll for determination of a quorum?
Councilmember Warren.
Here.
Councilmember Lavelle.
Here.
Councilmember Holliday.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stone.
Here.
Mayor DeForest.
Here.
Let the record reflect that all members are present.
All right, we're going to do the Community Facilities District Workshop staff, and I see you're ready. Sorry for our tardiness coming back. Can we have the report, please?
Good evening, Mayor DeForest and council members. This workshop on CFDs is the follow-up to your council's request on October 3rd, 23, where staff first presented the amended Community Facility District Goals and Policies item. Javier Carcamo is going to be leading off our presentation this evening, and he'll be joined by Shane Spicer from the Spicer Consulting Group and Brian Forbath from the law firm of Stradling, Yoka, Carlson, and Ralph. Javier, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ivan. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council members. Tonight's agendas is related to the workshop, includes various topics associated with community facilities districts. including its process and implementation. Brian, to my right, will be providing this overview as part of his presentation tonight. I will be sharing with you information about Murrieta's future growth, primarily sharing with you single and multifamily housing developments data and the impact on the city's financial resources and service levels associated with the growth, but primarily focusing on the impact on service levels associated with our public safety services. Shane Spicer with Spicer Consulting Group was engaged to evaluate the fiscal impact associated with future development, and he will provide a presentation of its findings. And lastly, I will bring it back and share with you again and share with you the significant changes that staff propose to the Community Facility District's goals and policies. So here's a little background on the Community Facilities District's goals and policies. On January 21, 2003, the City Council adopted the Land Secure Financing Policy, also known as the Community Facility District's goals and policies. On April 5, 2016, the City Council adopted a resolution amending the Land Secure Financing Policy. And on October 3rd, 2023, the City Council considered an amendment to the Community Facility District's goals and policy and directed staff to present recommendations in a workshop setting. You may ask as to the reason staff is proposing an amendment to the CFD goals and policies. So the purpose of the CFD goals and policies is to establish a set of guidelines for the formation of a CFD for the acquisition or construction of public infrastructure and to support the provisions of authorized public services which new residents expect the city to deliver. With significant single and multifamily housing development in the future, city staff recommends the formation of a community facility district for public safety services. Based on the number of zoning applications and building permit data, the increase in single and multifamily housing development is imminent. With the changes in state law and the number of projects currently in the pipeline, the build-out population is estimated to be approximately or around 150,000. This equates to approximately an additional 14,000 units, housing units, by the time we're built out. The increase in population will result in an increase in service demand. Today, we focus on service demands for public safety services, and for both fire and police staffing levels will need to increase in order to maintain the appropriate staffing levels and response times. So the formation of a community facility district for public safety services fully supports the land use and infrastructure policies within the adopted general plan. Primarily, the land use policy 1.8 ensures that physical impact associated with growth are evaluated to ensure the city's ability to provide vital services is not compromised. And the infrastructure policy 1.20 states that the city, when considering development, includes an assessment for all impact on public facilities, services, infrastructure, and identify any necessary mitigation. In an effort to understand the impact of new housing development and the increase in population, the city engaged Spicer Consulting Group to complete a fiscal impact analysis. The analysis includes the use of metrics and city policies to determine the appropriate resources to provide a sustainable level of services in public safety. The fiscal impact analysis also include the staffing needs for future for future city projects, such as a new fire station that we have been discussing, that is Fire Station 6, for which City Council has recently approved an agreement for an schematic design services. The report also provides findings on the impact of new housing development and recommends the implementation of a community facility district for public safety services to mitigate the negative fiscal impact and maintain the appropriate service level. So you may ask as to why the formation of a CFD for public safety services. The city has earned the reputation of being one of the safest cities in America. This is primarily due to our talented public safety personnel, adequate staffing levels, and physical sustainability. In order for the city to continue to maintain this reputation, it is essential that the city take action today so we can be ready for the future. Currently, the city population is approximately 115,000, which is currently being served by 106 sworn officers, all housed in one police station, and 62 sworn suppression personnel, all housed in 5 fire stations. Earlier during my presentation, I shared with you the use of professional metrics for public safety services. The projected police staffing level and cost used in the fiscal impact analysis were based on a 1.0 police officer per 1,000 residents, plus an additional 20 support staff members. That is an additional 44 sworn officers to bring it to a total of 150 officers to serve a population of 150,000 by the time we're built out. The estimated staffing needs for fire protection, including emergency response, were based on personnel for Fire Station 6, a 3rd patrol medic, and a 4-person truck company. It also includes the addition of a division chief and a fire inspector. The fiscal impact analysis identifies and estimates the costs associated with the growth and the estimated additional revenue to be generated through build-out. The analysis expects continuous growth in retail development, and it is expected that the generated revenue cannot fully mitigate financially the impact on city services levels from new development. The general fund and Measure T revenues together will not be adequate to fund those additional positions at or near the build-out population. Thus, staff, along with Spicer Consulting Group, have analyzed forming a CFD to fund the new public safety positions. Shane will provide additional information during his presentation. With that, that completes my portion of this presentation. Now I'm going to hand it over to Brian, who's going to provide you information about CFDs.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to be here in front of you this evening again. So I think Javier sort of set the stage about the need for the public safety funding. So I think at the last meeting when we were here, there was a request to learn a little bit more about the CFD process and what CFDs are just on a general level. And I know a lot of you are probably somewhat familiar with it, but just to sort of step back a little bit and give a higher level view of that. So CFD is a land secured district, land secured financing district. And there's a couple different types of those. The two main ones are a community facilities district, the CFD, or an assessment district. And the main difference between those two is that an assessment district can only assess properties for the special benefit that a property receives. And because of that, underneath the Constitution, it's a lower threshold of voting. It's a 50% vote, and it's a vote based on the amount of your assessment that you have. And so assessments are common in areas that are already developed for undergrounding overhead utilities, for a direct sewer line that might benefit a few projects, a few homes or whatever specifically. A CFD is a much broader tool, and that allows for the financing of improvements through a special tax. That special tax can be based on general benefits, and because it's a special tax under the Constitution, it's a 2/3 vote, so it's a higher threshold than an assessment district. So what is a CFD? It's really a method to finance public improvements, public capital improvements or services. It's limited in geographic area. And essentially, a CFD will levy special taxes that could be used to pay debt service on bonds that finance capital improvements, roads, streets, parks, schools, water, sewer, infrastructure. It can also be used to finance certain public services like landscaping, lighting, maintaining, police and fire services. It's important to understand that the CFD bonds and the CFD special taxes are not an obligation of the city. It's an obligation of the property owners, of the obligation of the property on which the CFD, the special tax, is levied. The bonds that CFD issued are only payable from those special taxes. It's not an obligation or liability of the city. The city's general fund is not on the hook to repay debt service on those bonds. A CFD is a separate legal entity, so when you form a CFD, if you decide to choose it and choose to do so, and you already are the legislative body of certain CFDs, you become the legislative body of that CFD and you act on its behalf. The city council sits as the legislative body and takes actions on that CFD's behalf. They are a separate legal entity, and again, there's no city financial responsibility for that. CFDs, importantly, can be formed by a city, they can be formed by a county, they can be formed by a school district, they can be formed by a special district, they can be formed by a joint powers authority that's a combination of any of those entities to fund a CFD for a specific purpose. So what can a CFD finance? I've sort of highlighted this a little bit, but this side sort of brings it home a little bit more. It finances street improvements, finances water, sewer, storm drain improvements, parks, libraries, schools, childcares, community centers, animal shelters. And then it can also finance development impact fees that are directly attributable to these same public improvements. So in other words, if there's a streets impact fee that's imposed, we could finance that impact fee with municipal bonds, and the proceeds of those bonds would then have to be used to finance the improvements that those impact fees would ultimately pay for. Oops, I think I jumped too far. So CFDs, the way that CFDs work is the voters, which is early on, if it's a landowner district and there's no registered voters, it's the landowners or the developer of the property, would form the CFD, and they would approve what we call a rate and method of apportionment of the special tax. And that sets out sort of the bylaws of how the CFD will function and how taxes are set and how they'll be levied each year. It establishes what we call a special tax requirement, and that's the amount of revenue that's needed to fund the CFD activities. It also sets forth the maximum rates that could be levied on a property. And those rates, as we'll talk about, could be either a flat rate each year based on square footage, it could be based on acreage, size of the house, however it's decided to be. Or sometimes those rates could also escalate each year by 2%, 1%. And in the process of a services tax, a lot of times those will go up by consumer price index or some other indices that would reflect the growing cost of the services that would be provided. The rate and method would also set out the term of the tax. Usually it's for a facilities tax, it's usually 40 years, although the bonds that would be issued would only usually be a 30-year bonds. For a services CFD, that tax could be in perpetuity or for 99 years, however is required. Again, the taxes are collected on the property tax bills by the county, so it goes out on your property tax bill, and again, you can only pay your property tax bill in whole, so you've got to pay your property taxes, you have to pay your CFD taxes. And again, it's not a special assessment. The tax can be based on sort of any reasonable basis for the improvements that are to be financed. So this slide here just sort of sets forth the general process of how a developer CFD would work, a registered voter CFD that, a consortium of residents that come forward might be a little bit different process. But essentially a property owner would petition a CFD, petition the city to form a CFD, and then the city would collect a deposit normally from the developer to pay for upfront costs associated with that. The city would then commence the CFD proceedings by doing the resolution of intention. That is the initial step that the council would take. And then that resolution of intention to form a CFD would usually cause a public hearing to be held at least 30 days later. At that time, the city council, acting as a legislative body, would form the CFD and determine the necessity to incur bonded indebtedness. And then at that point, after the public hearing, those resolutions would call for an election to be held. And at that point in time, the landowners, the property owners, would vote at that election for or against the CFD. Assuming that the election passes, that the election results get certified by you as the city council, you would introduce an ordinance authorizing the levy of special tax. A notice of special tax would then get recorded upon all the property on the real property records in Riverside County. And then at some point, when the CFD is sufficiently mature enough and there's enough development activity, the council would consider the issuance of bonds to finance reimbursement of the developer of certain public improvements that were constructed. And again, the bond proceeds would go to reimburse for certain eligible public facilities that would be approved by the council and the voters. And the city would also annually collect as part of special taxes administrative costs to pay for the ongoing costs, administration of the CFD, and staff time associated with that. Again, one of the important things is to kick off all that process is the requirement for a landowner to deposit to pay costs of the formation. That really sort of separates real developers from land speculators. That deposit would be used to cover the costs of legal counsel, financial advisors, special tax consultants, appraisers, and all the other consultants that you need to form the CFD and issue bonds. And then eventually, if and when bonds are issued, the landowner would get reimbursed from those bond proceeds. And with that, I'll hand this over to Shane to talk about other agencies in Riverside County that have CFDs.
Good evening. Pleasure being here. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to cover a little bit about the CFDs that are within the city and our surrounding communities, how they're used, and then I'm going to do a little bit of a discussion on the impact analysis that we worked on with staff to determine how future development impacts services for future growth. So this slide here reflects the latest tax roll information for Riverside County. And as you can see, there are over 1,000 CFDs within the county itself that CFDs are being utilized. And as Brian had mentioned, there's different functions for these CFDs. And we typically group them as a facility CFD, a maintenance CFD, or a public safety CFD. And there's a number of ways that those CFDs can be structured and modeled. It's a pretty deep topic, but they are used consistently and regularly through a number of municipalities throughout the state, and this just highlights County of Riverside. As you can see, the cities consist of the majority of CFDs overall. At over 45% of the CFDs are with city agencies. However, cities are also the majority of the maintenance services districts, as they're the primary maintenance service provider compared to other agencies, and they are, as you can see, the entirety of public safety CFDs within the county, and there are a few throughout the county. And important to note that also school districts do have CFDs as a big portion of their business operations. School districts find themselves limited to state funding as they get that money from the state without having a whole lot of influence of those dollars. And they utilize CFDs as a means to finance improvements for new schools and school refurbishment. So you can see here that they have almost half of the facility CFDs within the county. It's just important to note that there are other agencies outside of cities that do form CFDs. So within the city of Murrieta, there are currently 15 CFDs. They're listed here. As you can see, the dates are representative of when they were formed typically. They pretty much in the early 2000s, from 2000 to 2005. Those CFDs, just because they were formed back then doesn't mean that they fully developed back then. And some CFDs take a little while to actually mature into where they begin the development. In fact, I know, for example, 2005-5 Golden City IAB, I'm paying into that one personally, which is a fairly newer development. So I know that one wasn't just formed. So as you can see, there are 49 CFDs within the city's boundary. The majority of those are within the Murrieta School District. What's noteworthy is that after the city pretty much stopped really forming CFDs, facility CFDs, the projects went to school districts as their primary source for setting these up. So even though the city stopped more or less doing that exercise, the school district, in fact, I looked at it, about a third of Murrieta School District CFDs came on after the last city CFD was formed. So they are still being used. So to turn a little bit into the general fund analysis, so I was engaged a while back to work with staff to analyze the city's general fund and the projected growth that I know a lot of effort was being done with planning and finance to review and anticipate what that looks like. And Javier did a really good job of setting this portion of the analysis up. What we did is we worked with the planning department and finance to pull information together. We looked at the city's general plan, which currently had projected build out in the fiscal year 2038-39. We evaluated the residential projects or all projects within the planning queue and segregated which ones were single family, which ones were multifamily, kind of get a real sense of what residential development would be in order to support the projected population growth to 150,000 people. That's about a 24% growth over that time frame. Next, we worked with finance to pull line item detail, looked at the city's general fund budget, the approved budget, the real-time budget, worked with also the chiefs for police and fire to determine what would be the staffing needs, looking at the personnel costs for current service levels and then what that future service level to support additional 39,000 population growth. So as was identified, and I mentioned, about 24% of the future population is going to be through build out on new residential. And in that, as was mentioned, approximately 14,000 residential units would be needed to support that, which have been more or less identified in the city's planning queue. With that, we're looking at about 3,300 single-family, 9,600 multifamily units, and approximately 1,000 affordable housing units. And these will vary and grow and change as time goes through it, but this is what we were looking at currently. And as mentioned, about 37,000 new population. It's interesting, those numbers were also used in order to identify the people per household factors, which all feed into number of rooftops to support that type of development. So as I'll just highlight real quickly, we did identify those additional 84 personnel requirements, both in police and fire, and those were factored into growth expenditures to support the ultimate build out of the city. So in evaluating the city's general fund expenditures, we identified what we'd call basic level service direct expenditure line items. We removed any one-time costs, any project costs, anything that was, covering debt service payments or any of those expenditures that were not representative of services that the city would be providing to the general public. And as expected, about 72% of that is made up with public safety services, and that's pretty standard. Between 60 and 80% of your general funds for most municipalities are for public safety. Police services consisting of $34.5 million of that, and with fire services at $21 million. So in looking at the projected build out, we determined about $145 million in direct expenditures for the city's service to be provided through expenditures. This was again based on financial information provided by staff based on the city's long-term financing plan. We anticipated increase of service costs of approximately 3%, accepting public safety services. Those generally reflect 6 to 8% increases depending on the negotiated contracts, hours required to provide services, staffing needs, and so on. We did include increased personnel costs for police and fire reflected here. That's full burden costs for those personnel. We also did evaluate the general fund's revenues. We did identify the property tax and sales and use tax. This is indicative of your standard property tax revenues that are all consistently for cities, a majority of the revenues, and sales tax with the 1% and additional measure T consisted almost an equal measure of $20 million for a $69.7 million of direct revenues for services from the general fund. So in our findings, what we did is we, utilizing the expected expenditures of $145 million to support the 150,000 population, 24% is for new residents to be served. That's $34.9 million in expenditures on new residential development. Applying the general fund revenues, looked at the property sales tax, property tax model that applies to the city's property tax, including sales tax and use tax. And we were pretty generous in trying to identify some of the additional sales tax that would be coming from projects that are in the queue. Did a per capita analysis on those revenue sources, and then we did a per unit analysis when it came to franchise fees, fire special assessment, and so on. So in total, general fund revenues from new development would be approximately $28 million. Well, when you take the $28 million and apply it to the $34.9 million, there's a $6.8 million shortfall that should be mitigated for new development to pay for their increased service demands. So new development paying its way, representative of about $6.8 million. And when we convert that to what would be a CFD tax rate, if the council decides to approve a CFD structure, that would be reflective of $580 per single family, $468 per multifamily, and $250 for affordable housing units. So this slide is to represent what would be a sample tax bill for a property approaching an agency like a school district on your left, and what might be considered if it was a similar project coming to the city with a public safety CFD. And what this really reflects is that taking an average home value of $550,000, which is low for Murrieta, I recognize that, but just the context is really what's the tax structure look like. So as Brian had mentioned, the CFD having its own tax on the tax bill collected by the county tax collector is identified as you set up the CFD. And that structure will then project what would be a revenue source to pay back bonds, and that's what that proposed CFD is representative. We generally see between $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 for public facilities, CFDs is pretty standard. But the key metric is that 2% effective tax rate. All agencies are not have a policy and none go above the 2% at formation. So that's a key identifier to say, well, you're capped at 2%, and usually that 2% is filled up with that facility CFD, for example, if it was a school district. So that tax rate would be in effect for a new CFD, could be presented tomorrow to a school district or water district. On the right shows what would that mean if the public safety CFD was enforced. So if the public safety CFD would be included, it would be factored ahead of a facility CFD. Even if the city wasn't the lead on a facility CFD, it has to be considered by any agency that, hey, the city's going to get is $580 per unit for public safety services, and that decreases what would be financed through an improvement CFD, which means that the developer would get less bond proceeds by that amount over the life of the bonds if the bonds were issued. So it just really only provides additional services to that resident in public safety services reflective of that, and they're paying the same tax rate had they been formed with a school district. So in essence, what we're saying is you're not raising any taxes on property to add this. You're just taking out of one bucket to provide a service. And finally, this slide represents the variety of public safety CFDs throughout Riverside County. Your neighbors have these in place, and many of them have been around for years, decades even. And it just really shows that with these different CFDs, the tax rates vary, and they vary pretty significantly. It looks like between $247 and $958. A $580 amount falls well within that range of cities. The important note is that every city is different. Every city operates differently. Every city provides different levels of services. We understand where Murrieta stands and the public safety needs and how important that is. But this gives you kind of a gauge of where that falls in line with other jurisdictions. I had also included on the slide the variety of different escalators that would be factored in. Those are identified when you form the CFD. So when that comes forward, you can discuss what that escalator looks like. And as Brian had mentioned, they usually vary, and it's more in line with the typical cost of services. Unlike a maintenance CFD where you typically have a 2% escalator, public safety services often well exceed that standard, and so you try to make sure that you're covered so that as costs increase, you're able to stay in line with that. Again, what's important to note is that just because you form a public safety CFD does not mean that you're required to levy that public safety CFD every year. That number can vary as services, if things come in service costs are less, revenues are higher, you can adjust how much that public safety CFD potentially passing savings on if you're in good shape, or it just ensuring that you are providing those adequate levels of services to the community. With that, I'll turn it over to Javier.
Thank you, Shane. So with that information being shared with you, I want to bring it back really quick to what later on tonight, as part of your regular meeting, the amended and restated community facility district goals and policies will be back to you for approval considerations. And it's just as a reminder, this is our current policy that we have and the most significant provisions. The proposed updates to the policy and the most significant changes to the policies is to establish a maximum of 2% of the greater of the assessed value or appraised value of such property, which is an increase from 1.8% from the current policy. Such change of these policies really will incentivize developers to participate in the formation of a community facility district for public safety services in an effort to mitigate the physical impact and maintain the appropriate service levels. The other change is to allow or permit the escalation of a facility tax in any amount not to exceed 2% annually. Special taxes for services may escalate in a manner determined by the city as necessary to cover the estimated increases in the cost of providing such services. Lastly, include the development impact fees as an eligible cost to be financed by the district. So this report is to receive and file. There's no action for council tonight, but we're here to answer any questions that you may have about tonight's presentation.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the in-depth analysis of a CFD. I appreciate all that information that you've given. I will move to my fellow council members. Do we have any questions for staff on this? I see Mayor Pro Tem Stone.
Ivan, did you take into consideration, so let me go back to my notes. You talked about that the analysis was done with the projects that are in the queue. Is that correct? So the analysis of this report was with the projects that are in the queue. As you know, we have some potential projects that are coming down the pipeline that are going to be wonderful. And I believe if these projects do come to fruition, I anticipate the out-of-area tax base as far south as Escondido and as far north as Corona. And have you taken in consideration those future projects that will bring in out-of-area tax dollars?
Councilmember Stone, the answer is yes.
Okay.
And as you may recall, when Mr. Spicer was giving his portion of the report, when he calculated the anticipated growth that brings us up to about 150,000 in population, that's not just residential development, that's also commercial development and industrial development. He calculated the anticipated revenue from that additional growth, and it was around $28 million. I'm trying to remember from the slide, but it's approximately that. But the expenditures that come along with that totaled about $34 million, and hence the delta of close to $7 million. So again, the short answer was yes, we did analyze that in the study.
Okay, great. And then, Mr. Spicer, you said something about if we're doing well financially, that we can adjust the CFD, correct? With regards, is this regards to services only?
So yeah, for services only, you would be, so annually, as part of the administrative process, is what council will be approving are resolutions that are going to instruct applying the tax as a tax roll. Before that, we do sit down, we review budgets and budgetary information, and the staff and the tax consultant would review what are the projected service costs over the next fiscal year. And it's a fiscal year to fiscal year basis. So in evaluating that, if there was a determination that there wasn't a need for additional public safety taxes, or not to increase, what a couple cities have done over the last few years is maybe not increase the escalator and just leave it at more of a stable dollar amount for each year. So you have options to turn on, turn off.
Okay.
So it gives you the flexibility, you know, you know, of course, those amazing projects, if they come in and, or they're delayed, then, you know, you have this option in your back pocket.
Okay, great. Thank you. That concludes my comments. Thank you both.
Could I elaborate just one quick, add one quick item to that? So in one sense, because of the ability that Shane just described, you might view this as a backstop, right? So this prevents us from running into a deficit, but there is an opportunity for your council on an annual basis to take a look at it and make adjustments.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Holliday.
If Councilmember Warren would like to go first, so I don't steal all of her questions, I'm willing to defer to her.
Sure.
Councilmember Warren with a deferment from Holliday.
Moving right along. I have a couple of questions, not too many, sir. I did want to ask our consultant, how many cities have you performed this type of analysis on? Just generally.
6 or 7,
Okay. And how accurate have your findings been with your analysis?
pretty accurate. Yeah, we haven't had to adjust any
Okay.
southward.
That's good to know. Thank you very much. Also, I wanted to ask, the infrastructure fees to get the bonds, once those are paid off, those sunset and they go off the property tax bill once everything's paid. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That is correct.
Yeah, so again, as Mr. Spicer talked about for the public safety CFD, it's the same basis each year for the facility CFD, where there's a special tax requirement, and that's the amount of bonds that are needed to pay the amount of special tax that are needed to pay debt service on bonds, the amount that's required to pay for city administrative expenses. And then there's also an ability to levy and collect taxes, should the city council desire, to pay for repairs or other sort of improvements to facilities that were constructed. So in other words, if you financed a park and then you get 30 years into it, the bonds have been paid off, and you realize, like, oh my gosh, the park needs new teeter-totters, new overgains or whatever, there is the flexibility, should the council desire to do that, to continue to levy the taxes to pay directly for that.
But what I'm getting at is the homeowner does have, over time, that will go away.
Correct, yes.
So their property tax would come down, but the public service part of it would stay in
Correct.
place. So if it's $4,000 on one side and we don't do the public safety, they're still paying the $4,000. On the other side, they'd be paying $580 less, $4,000 less the $580, and that difference could go away. The larger amount could go away, but the public safety would remain in place. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
that's absolutely correct. And there will always be opportunities in the future for, bonds are issued originally and they're sized off of the revenue constraints. And just like refinancing your house for savings, there'll be an opportunity after bonds are issued in 10 years to reduce the amount of debt service in the bonds and lower residents' property taxes. And we do that all over the place in Riverside County for clients.
I thought that was correct. I just wanted to verify. Thank you so much. A great presentation, very in-depth. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Warren. Councilmember Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Could we go back to the slide that showed the 2 property tax bills for a second? Great job on the presentation, gentlemen. The question I had on the slide, you had mentioned proposed CFD as it might be a school district, but typically where do you see these proposed CFDs go?
They go everywhere. School district, water districts, cities.
Developers?
Well, so they're formed on behalf of the developer, but the public agency is the authority that forms the district and is also acts as the conduit to pass the taxes on the tax roll to receive the funds and acts, as Brian had mentioned, as the legislative body.
Yeah,
Right,
one
that's-
thing I would just add to what he said, and I think might help put this in context, is lots of times when there's a new development, there are a lot more eligible public facilities that can be financed by CFDs than there is capacity to finance. And so the developers will then might go look and go, okay, well, we've got X amount that we got to fund at the water district, X available for the city, X amount that we got to pay to the school district. And the developers could shop that around to see like, okay, we're going to go to the water district, or we're going to go to the school district, or we're going to go to the city. We know we can't finance all of it, so they could shop that around.
And it includes things, as you mentioned, like water, sewer, streets, lights, sidewalks.
Correct.
Any public facility.
Yeah, and the one advantage that the city has is if it's a school district or a special district, they have to finance the majority of the majority of the dollars that are financed for that CFD have to go to their facilities. Whereas if a city finances, forms a CFD, that doesn't apply. So the city could finance 20% of the bond proceeds go to the streets, 40% go to the water district to pay for water and sewer, and another 20 to go to the schools. That can't happen quite the same way through special districts or school districts.
Okay.
And if I can maybe add a little bit to that, if you don't mind. What's being described there is that if the city's the lead agency, that means you're driving the ship and you're able to dictate, what's in, what's out. You're also able to determine when to refinance and pass on savings, as opposed to another agency might keep the tax rate higher and put the money in, a fund for future use. So you're acting as the fiduciary. It's advantageous as well for the development community because it'll be a one-stop shop for them. As was mentioned, they could shop different places and maybe have to set up a couple, which all that does is cause an extra administrative cost. Costs them to do the formation, also costs the property owner because they're paying for, multiple agencies to do the same thing. Where if the city handled it all, then it would be actually one place and you can control the strings on a lot of that.
Understood. So in your two scenarios, since the proposed CFD amount is less, where is that money coming from? It's not coming from the property tax payer.
Yes,
Because
so
their property tax didn't change.
So the property tax didn't change. All that means is that at the end of the day, the builder isn't getting as much bond proceeds back for what could be financed under $4,000 a unit versus $3,420 a unit.
So it's coming out of the developer's
So it's
pocket.
coming out of the developer, and because that's the case here, I think that's, if I can add, a little bit of the genesis for some of the considerations in the policy changes to account for maybe allowing for a little more flexibility so that this is not, a total loss in some senses, and allow the council to make decisions on what works and what doesn't work.
Understood. Thank you.
Could I follow up on that? Mr. Spicer's point is a valid one. So a couple of the policy changes that we proposed previously, you'll see later this evening, were to provide additional flexibility. So to take the cap from 1.8 to 2%. Part of the reason for that is there's another component to that. So the other reason, or the other thing that's a new item, or would be a new item, is the ability to finance development impact fees. Once again, that's advantageous to the developer, but that's part of the trade-off. And so all of those things went into our rationale and analysis as we brought a policy forward to your council for consideration.
Understood. The second question under the metrics that you used to determine what was going forward, you used our city council policy on police officers at 1 per 1,000, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Do you know what our officers per 1,000 ratio is today?
I believe it's 0.9.
And do you know what it's been since the formation of the city?
Councilmember Holliday, I don't know the answer to that question, but I may know someone who does.
Me too.
We're all looking at it.
If I could ask Chief Conrad to address that.
I think I already know the answer, but. Sorry to put you on the spot, Chief.
I've paid attention the whole meeting, but I was talking to my captain. What was the question?
Likely story, likely story.
Sorry, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stay after class.
Yes, sir.
What has been the historical police officer to resident ratio in the city of Murrieta?
That's a long-standing question. There's a lot of things that go into coming up with that ratio. Ratio is one thing that we've talked about here a lot tonight, right? 0.9 per thousand, 1 per thousand. But the way I do staffing is much more detailed. That is one consideration I take in is of course the ratio. And I look at the other cities throughout Riverside County, Southern California. But ratio, if we just looked at that across the nation, it's about 2.5 officers per thousand, right? So we really have to drill down on what we have here in Murrieta, what the expectations are of the community, the type of officers that I hire, and the calls for service. So I do a workload saturation report. We do that once a month. We follow what I call the rule of 60, which is, it's empirical, and there's ICMA and other bodies that believe in it. But bottom line is we don't want officers to be busier or on calls for service, tied up, not available more than 60% of their shift. And right now we're floating around the 54 to 55% range. And I also know a lot of my officers don't put themselves out on things. So a citizen may flag them down, they might be on a business check, but they show in service because they haven't put that out in the air. That's something we're trying to remedy internally so that we can get really good stats, but I would probably inflate that. If we're at 54, we're probably pushing 60 right now. So we're right up against it. Once we breach the 60% mark, that's when we start to lose our proactivity, right? So that's why right now we're about 0.9 per thousand. I've been very pleased with that, but I'm starting to see that percentage, that workload saturation report is going up, right? So I would recommend that we start pushing that, really seriously considering 1 per thousand. And again, I can go into all the different data that goes into that, but that's why I'm looking at that now. I can't really speak 20 years back to 5 chiefs ago, the way they looked at it. We all know about ratios, but this is drilling down it a little bit more. So,
Well, I can say, since I've been involved with the city for a long time, back in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, it was also 0.9 per thousand. I understand that metric isn't what you want to look at all the time. Unobligated patrol time is a much better metric, and I support that 100%. But doing all the analysis and stuff you do, it still equates to an end result of so many officers per thousand.
yes.
And so my question for the consultants was, if our historically we went at 0.9 per thousand, why did we do this analysis at 1 per thousand? I know that's where we would like to be. But that's not a question for you, Chief.
Okay.
Because you were looking like a deer in the headlights there.
Thank you, Chief Conrad.
So what we looked at in our conversations with Chief Conrad and as a part of the analysis is the ratio of multifamily to single family. Because state law has changed, we're seeing a lot of multifamily projects come in today that we wouldn't have seen before. And that's, I'll editorialize just for a moment, that's because some of our local control has been stripped away by the legislature. So I'm done with my editorializing.
Feel free to continue.
As a result of that, you get different kinds of calls associated with different kinds of projects. And one of the things in conversations with Chief Conrad, in addition to his saturation model, was a desire to increase from 0.9 to 1 to better serve the city into the future, given the slightly different makeup.
And does multifamily typically generate more calls for service?
I would say just experience-wise for me, I think it does. I think when we have condensed housing, we can see more calls for service. I'll add a little bit more to that, though. We're kind of exponentially, and what Ivan's saying is correct, but we're seeing increases. 911 calls for 2022, we had about 25,000. I'm going to have 31 to 32,000 this year, right? So we're seeing those increases go up exponentially faster now. Now, is that because there's a massive influx of population? Well, we know there's going to be. So that my recommendation is to go to the 1
per thousand for a number of different reasons. We've made it on 0.9, you're correct, Councilmember Holliday, but I think if we're gonna keep the level of service, I'm telling you right now, we're at a 54% saturation rate, probably pushing 60. Once you bring in X amount more units, we're gonna breach that amount and our officers are gonna be reactive, not proactive. And that's not the service that you want for your community, so.
No, I understand. And I should have had this caveat to the beginning. Don't read into my questions that it means anything. Sometimes I'm just trying to bring out that exact information that you guys shared.
Sure.
Thank you. Now on to fire. What is the formula that is used for the number of sworn fire personnel that's needed?
Once again, Councilmember Holliday, we may know someone.
Come on down.
Chief Molloy?
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Council. So the fire departments, we don't have an exact formula that we use. We use much like the police department does, we use unit hour utilization. But NFPA, which is the national standards body for fire protection, they've done studies and they do averages of what the number of firefighters per 1,000 people is. On the West Coast, that average is 0.99. In the city of Murrieta, ironic, 0.99. In the city of Murrieta, currently, we're at 0.55. So we're half of the national average for a municipality between 25 and 250,000 people. When you go above 250,000 people, it actually goes up. And when you go to the Midwest and the East Coast, that number actually goes up as well. They're at about 1.5. So we look at the system we have built here, and we have innovative things that we do, like putting medic patrols in place so they can absorb a lot of medical aids. We can have a higher unit hour utilization on those medic patrols so we can keep our fire suppression apparatus ready to do fire suppression. So we don't need to get to that 0.9. But if we, or the 0.99, or essentially we'll say 1 per 1,000. But we're at half. When we built out this plan for this, through this whole project, and we looked at what it looks like in 2039 when we build our fire department to 150,000 people, we've added about 20 suppression personnel in that, and that brings us to 0.56. So we're still at half, and though we do a lot of innovative things to make it so we don't need to get to that 1, we have to stay at least 50% of the national standard for the West Coast to get there.
Yeah, you would hate to go down, for sure.
We would certainly hate to go down.
So this, at build-out, you're having it at 0.56 is the estimate?
At build-out, we would be at 0.56 with what we have planned here. And as we know, different types of housing bring different call volume, socioeconomic changes in the city bring different call volume, access to healthcare brings different call volume. So we're trying to address that through the innovations that we bring, but we do have to keep that staffing up. Just for perspective, the city of Corona, which is a close city to us, built a lot like us, 39 square miles, we're almost 36 square miles. They're currently at about 160,000 people in the city. That's close to where we'll be at build out. Currently, they're at 112 suppression personnel. They're at a 0.7 per 1,000. They're the same system as us, but they're closer to that 1.
But they don't, Corona doesn't have you and all our wonderful firefighters, though.
I agree. And I don't see us ever at a point where we get to that 1 per 1,000 in our city. I think we need to look at utilizing regional assets and doing some other things to help with that. But certainly we can't go below that 0.56. No. And without the changes that we have here, to get to that, we'd have a structural deficit in our budget of about $3 million a year when we got there.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just something that's totally off track, but since you brought it up, the assessment districts, I know that the CFDs are collected through a special tax that's levied on a property tax bill. How are ADs collected?
Same way, on the property tax bill, yes.
Okay. And of the history of the CFDs that you showed in Murrieta, why did they stop in '05? Anyone know that?
I would imagine that, a lot of that sort of stopped with the transition of the Great Recession in '07 to '09. That development sort of stopped largely in CFDs in Riverside County. I mean, there was a lot of CFDs weren't formed during that period as development slowed and builders weren't building. And then, I can't speak for what happened between 2009 and 2016, but I've had the pleasure of being here with you all since about 2015 or 2016. And that was when Golden Cities sort of came back to life, and they came back to the city and requested change proceedings to update and refresh their CFD. And at that point in time, that was the sort of the first CFD that the city had considered in some time.
And I know that in our previous session, it was discussed that the reason the policy was changed, which I still don't agree with the rationale, but the reason the policy was changed back in 2016 was to promote more development and more CFDs, and that did not happen.
Yeah, you know, to be honest, I can't recall all of the impacts of why the policy changes were made in 2015 or 2016. I think some of it might have been, honestly, to provide some levels of protection out of the Great Recession that were sort of, but I'm not certain on that.
Yeah.
Councilmember Holliday, if I could follow quickly.
Sure.
So we did watch the video, and I would say that we were not really able to discern exactly why the policy changes were recommended, but the only thing that we could come up with is that was kind of at the tail end of the recessionary period, and they were making some changes accordingly. But I think what was left out of the discussion is other entities, water districts, special districts, school districts, can also form CFDs, and that wasn't a part of the discussion at the time.
True, true. And do we happen to know at what rate the previous CFDs were formed at? The 15 that you showed?
Those are 2%, I believe.
Hard to say today because in times past, it'd be when it was formed.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm asking. When it was formed, do we know what the rate was?
I don't.
Golden Cities was 1.8.
1.8?
Yeah, but I couldn't speak as to what the ones were formed pre-2007.
No worries. Oh, if you could go back to that one slide where you had the policy recommendations, Javier. The last one, remove the requirement of 50% of development to be required at the issuance of the bonds. Is that tied to the addition of adding the diff fees to the policy?
No, this one last bullet point is primarily, it sets a requirement as to when we can allow the developer to issue bonds. So this is basically to ensure that we are able to assess and collect enough assessment to start paying the bond debt service. And then, so that established that at a 50% requirement on the current policy. The proposed policy here is to remove the requirement and allow the city to establish a discretion as to when to issue the bonds.
So it just gives us more flexibility.
Yeah, and I would add that the policy does have safeguards set inside, and in fact, there's the provisions for requiring developers to potentially post a letter of credit for security for payments of special taxes on property that they own and so forth. And so it was just an amendment to make the CFDs potentially more flexible.
Mr. Forbath is correct. There was discussion on that at the council meeting in 2015. It was, I think, out of concern, again, given that we've just coming out of the recession, that a developer might not choose to develop, and the value is really in the developed property, not as much as in the dirt. So that was a protection. We don't believe that that's a necessary provision today.
Okay. And then my last question, not on this slide, but in the staff report, it talked about an escalator, 2% escalator on facilities. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I can take that. So the 2% escalator provides for additional bonding capacity. As we talked about going to the 2% effective tax rate, that might not be enough in some projects that have pro forma not factoring in a public safety CFD hit, right? So having an escalator allows for, it's structured at the time of formation that you know the schedule will increase annually at 2%. When you go to issue bonds, you have a revenue constraint that trends with that. And when that is taken into consideration and allows for more par amount to be issued to help to to remedy the public safety portion. That being said, even though the bonds would be structured at that, they're also at 10% coverage, so they're not maxed out. There's not a delinquency exposure on that sense. But it is structured at the time of formation, and bonds are issued to trend with that. And that's just to allow for additional funding capacity. And that would be discretionary
Per CFD.
for CFD.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Holliday. I have just one question. Mr. Holler, you talked a little bit about like local control, and this would allow us to have more public safety funding local control. Is that correct?
Mayor DeForest, yes.
Thank you. And loving local control, which we're all here for, that is the last of my questions, and I'll move to Madam City Clerk for any public comments, and I see some in the queue, so.
Casson Klein.
Welcome, Casson.
Good evening. As you recall, I spoke the last time this issue was before you, and philosophically, I'm generally opposed to this. However, given the new information that was presented here to you tonight, I'm changing my vote. You know, I don't ever recall seeing so many of our first responders attending a city council meeting. I think that speaks volumes. You know, we've been on the forefront from the very beginning. In fact, Murrieta for many years was the laughingstock of the county, and particularly in Southwest County, because we formed our own police department and the lion's share of our budget went to that. But one needs to look no further than just to our neighbors to the north that recently formed their own police department and are reaping the benefits of that in customer service and customer satisfaction. However, one of the things that you may not be aware of is when Menifee was considering forming their own police department, a number of cities looked into forming a JPA, right, to form a regional police department. You know, I think the bottom line here, no, I don't think. The bottom line here is we enjoy a lifestyle, a quality of life, and we pay a price for that. And if we want to maintain that, we've got to pay for it. And this is an avenue or a tool to do that. And so when the item comes before you, I would encourage you to please support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Klein.
Alan Long.
Welcome, Alan.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Like Mr. Klein, I was here at that meeting and I actually rose the question. I was on council in 2016, I think, when we approved it, and I did a good job of raising a red flag because anytime we were talking about fees or taxes, I think we really need to pause and take a hard look at that. I did a horrible job of recalling why we did the 1.8 and recalling those details, but I think it's still a good thing. And wow, this was an amazing presentation. What a difference a workshop makes. And I think everyone has a better understanding. Certainly I do, as a resident and business owner here in town. What I know now that I didn't know then is, one, you have a $6 million deficit for public safety specifically. Now, personally, an argument can be made, well, there's a multi-million-dollar budget, you approve the budget, you could shift money. I think public safety would always be priority. However, you would have the very difficult decision of where you're pulling that money from. And all city employees are important. They really are to provide that service. So the $6 million deficit, how that got here, that's another discussion. It's here, and you got to deal with it. And having that safety plan in place is really important, having a plan to decrease that. Dennis can do a great job and bring 20 different shopping centers in. I don't think you're still going to be short. In my experience, you're not going to meet the $6 million. The other part is you're not increasing fees tonight. You're not doing any of that. You're not raising taxes. You're not increasing fees. You're giving staff the tools to bring projects forward and the flexibility to do that. The other part is the 0.4 increment that specifically goes to a line item for public safety is monumental. And I had a revelation talking to some of you, Ron in particular, and staff, where if we kept it the same, we didn't do anything, and we put the 0.4%, that's important. You're allowed to do that, and it doesn't raise fees or taxes. There's no difference other than 0.4% is going towards public safety, which is really, really important. Now, later, do you give the ability to go 2%? Maybe. If they're giving 0.4% and they're bringing something special to the city, you have the ability to allow that. Pickleball courts come to mind after hearing so many residents talk about pickleball courts. If they want to do pickleball courts, do something the community wants and needs to allow that to happen at no cost to the current residents, that's a pretty innovative way of getting it done. So for those reasons and many others, I encourage you to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
Dan Lee.
Welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much, Honorable Council. What I wanted to do is give you a little overview from the development community standpoint. I've been a real estate developer in this community since the late 80s, developed residential projects, business parks, and very involved. Sit on the board of directors for National Association of Home Builders, Building Industry Association of Southern California. So what I've given to you, and unfortunately I don't have a overhead to give to everybody else, but what I wanted to explain to you is really the impact of financing and how a project gets financed and the important components of CFDs. And one of the examples, one of the key components and the main drivers that the consultant provided up there is the price of the house. And the fact that you have public safety as such a priority in a city, that adds to the value of the house. So just on that basic driver, you're increasing the value by taking care of your public safety. That's within the city. What I did was I gave you an analysis that to the left, it shows the bucket of total housing costs and how that gets financed. And starting at the bottom, the first factor is you go to get a construction and a development loan with bank financing. And that's typically, in today's day and age, 65% and loan to costs. And on top of that, a CFD is, in essence, from a developer's perspective, a form of financing. And this is how we look at it. And so we're able to put in, as the consultant outlined, that payment that gets allocated. What that does is it also allows a principal amount of improvements and or fees that get financed. And the benefit of having a fee-based financing mechanism is it allows 100-cent dollars. If you go to, and we had to go to a water district and we had to utilize that infrastructure for water and sewer improvements, then we would need to use prevailing wage. And under prevailing wage, you basically get 75 cents on the dollar because of the load that you have to pay because of prevailing wage. So in essence, in this analysis, and it's a very generic analysis, and you would need 28% equity to make that project come to fruition. Without a CFD, if you look at the inability to finance, the equity requirement jumps up to 35%, which is a significant hurdle to reach, given the fact that, and if you look at the center requirements, the yield requirements based on equity is 20% plus. So that capital is going to be looking to earn that type of yield. And so if we can lessen the amount of equity, because CFD proceeds, depending on if they're tax exempt or if they're pulled together with other assets and have a diversified base. Can I go over a little bit?
Feel free.
Those are at about 6 to 7%, and then construction and development loan today are at about 8.5 to 10%. So what I wanted to do was give you a real life example of how financing and CFDs work in development projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That concludes public comments.
Thank you so much. Any of my fellow council members have any comments or discussion? Seeing none?
Yes.
Oh, Mayor Pro Tem Stone.
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor. I want to thank council for agreeing to do this workshop. it was extremely beneficial for me to understand it more clearly. And there was a lot of discussion tonight, and 31 years ago, I believe it was 31 years ago that we formed our police department. Is that right? 31 years ago. And Mr. Klein was correct. Our neighboring cities thought we were out of our minds, that we would not contract with the sheriff, that we would go bankrupt within 10 years. And here we are today, 32 years later. We own our police and we own our fire. And what is happening today with the state legislature and putting the burden on us as a city with the, how many homes? 39,000 additional rooftops. That was something that was not anticipated back 32 years ago, 31 years ago. Times are different now. And Murrieta is known to be one of the safest cities in the nation. We're the third safest city in the nation. We're the second safest city in the state of California. That's the #1 reason why people move to Murrieta, is because of public safety. We are a community of quality of life. And today is much different than it was a few years ago. And there's a cost of doing business. And this is a cost of doing business, is protecting our residents and protecting the quality of life that we have here. And I just wanted to thank you all. And I also wanted to communicate with you a little bit more why this is very, very important, that we remain one of the safest cities in the nation. I made a promise that I would always protect the residents. I would always have your back. I would never vote on anything that would be encumbersome to the quality of life that would affect our residents. But tonight, the residents have to understand that we have to move forward with public safety, because if we don't have them, then we don't have the quality of life that we have here tonight. So thank you, Madam Mayor, for allowing me to say a few words.
Oh, you're so welcome, Mayor Pro Tem. And I will thank you all for the amazing in-depth CFD report and workshop. And thank you so much for your time, and thank my fellow council. And with that said, we have been sitting for approximately 3.5 hours, and I would like to take a break until 6:30. So we will take a recess until 6:30 when we can reconvene and start our regular meeting. Thank you so much. If I can call this meeting back to order. And I tried. Yes. Yeah, I took beating my gavel a little bit this morning today. All right, good evening again. I'd like to call to order our regular meeting of the Murrieta City Council. Madam City Attorney, please provide a report from our closed session.
Thank you, Mayor. The City Council met in closed session on one item pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2 because there was a significant exposure to litigation in one case. The City Council was updated and discussed the item. There's no reportable action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam City Attorney. Roll call. Madam City Clerk, could you please determine a quorum?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Warren?
Here.
Councilmember Lavelle?
Here.
Councilmember Holliday?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stone?
Here.
Mayor DeForest?
Here.
Let the record reflect that all members are present.
Thank you so much, Madam City Clerk. We're going to move now to the Pledge of Allegiance and the invocation. Tonight, Pastor Todd Harvey from Calvary Sunrise Church will lead us in our invocation, and we are honored today to have Troop 318 Scouts here working on a merit badge, and they will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. If I can invite them down to the front. Scout Troop 318. Welcome. I'll have everyone stand as they lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Everybody, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much, Scouts. We appreciate you being here.
All right, let's pray together. So, Father, we thank you, Lord, for tonight. We thank you for your love and the goodness that you show to us every day. Father, I thank you on the council wall here. I see in God we trust, and I thank you we live in a community that realizes our need of you, Father. So we just look to you tonight. We thank you for this Christmas season where we celebrate the gift of your Son and all that he's come to do for each one of us. We just pray your protection over the city, Lord. We thank you for the privilege of living here, and I just pray that you would bless the council members tonight, our mayor, and just give them wisdom and insight into what you would have each of them do, decisions that need to be made. And thank you for the community that's here, Lord. Each one, I just pray you would bless and watch over. Thanks for our first responders that are here, our firefighters and police, and just all that they do to keep us safe, Lord. So we just, again, look to you tonight and pray that your will would be done in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much, Pastor Harvey, for those beautiful words tonight. Thank you for being here for us. All right. Moving on, we have 2 items on our agenda. One is for the Carlson Gracie West Coast. So it is my privilege on behalf of the City of Murrieta to congratulate your organization on outstanding efforts creating an admirable youth program designed to focus on showcasing children's talents, self-awareness, commitment, respect, honor, and loyalty. Congratulations on the admirable award that you received at the International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation competition. You can all come forward, and I will bring the certificate. And my fellow colleagues.
Oh, we're going down.
Okay.
And here's the certificate of recognition. Congratulations. Thank you for being here. Right here. 1, 2, 3. And also, I was going to also give a certificate to Pop Warner Sports, but I have been told that they are heading for Florida, and they are in the top 4 in the nation. So we'll look forward to seeing them at our next council meeting. So, moving on, Madam City Clerk, we have a presentation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Patrick Ellis with the Murrieta-Wildomar Chamber of Commerce is here to present.
Welcome, Patrick.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, staff. Patrick Ellis, President and CEO of the Murrieta-Wildomar Chamber of Commerce. Tonight, though, I am representing the President and CEO of Explore Murrieta, our destination marketing organization, to do our annual update for you. So I only have about 100 slides. This will only be about a couple hours. We'll get you out of here in no time.
Can we take
Just
a break?
kidding.
Yeah, let's.
I'm going to do this as quick as I possibly can, and then I will answer any questions for you that I can. So a little overview for 2023 for our destination marketing organization. So when we entered the year, our strategy was to position Explore Murrieta as a hidden gem destination blessed with natural scenic beauty in our area. We learned from 2021 and 2022 that we needed to adopt a flexible plan, which we did, and we approved that. We approached it with also new campaigns and an online presence enhancement. Some of the key results you'll see on the screen in front of you on the right-hand side. We had over 9 million new impressions with a 5.9% click-through rate, which is basically more than double the industry standard. We had a 211% increase in website traffic from new users, 51% increase in total media placements, 135% increase in engagement, and 65% increase in followers, and over 1,400 signups and 700 plus email opt-ins from our Banwango passes, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. Next, we have our creative overview. In 2023, we started to enter into a quarterly content shoot with new themes, as you see there. So as we move through these slides, you're going to see a lot of new content that you probably have not seen before, unless you follow our social media channels online. Three of the main campaigns that we took up this year first had to do with, which is a not a normal one, is a Keep It Super campaign around the super bloom. This year we had not the super bloom we saw a few years back, but we did see another bloom this year that does put a lot of eyes on our region. We also then had our Relax It's Murrieta campaign, kind of going with the vibe that we all love in this area. And again, our Banwango campaigns, which is a interactive campaign. The Super Bloom campaign, it really was something that when the last Super Bloom happened, we wanted to make sure that we positioned ourselves to take advantage of this. And so we did that. So we built awareness that Murrieta is Bloom Central and an affordable area in Southern California to experience this natural phenomenon. One of the approaches that we took, which really synced well with the state of California and Visit California, was this idea around sustainable travel practices, which is a very big key buzz aspect of travel right now, especially with certain generations that are doing a lot of travel. So our Super Bloom social media campaign, you'll see here, saw a significant boost in overall engagements and impressions. There were a lot of opportunities for new graphics, new interactions that we've never done before. Our paid media metrics you see there, landing pages, we got visits of over 22,000 and our click-through rate at over 3%. We garnered over 6,000 views through TikTok and over 1,000 views on YouTube. What you see here is some of the content that we did. I encourage you, when you get a copy of this presentation, that where it says landing page content and video, I will encourage you to click on that when you have a chance and go to that. That landing page has an immeasurable amount of information around the Super Bloom. It has different downloadable pieces that you can use on your social media filters, things of that sort, which are very unique and opportunistic for us this year, and we're really engaged. As I was saying, with Visit California, they're a huge asset for us to leverage to get the word out. We utilize them for some of the travel tour publications that they do online and such. The Super Bloom Travel Stories is one of the ones that we were able to leverage through that, and you'll see here, putting this out, we were able to get over 16,000 total story views and a click-through rate of nearly 5%, again, well above the industry standard. Paid media overview, we had increased visitation during non-peak periods, and that is our goal. Retain visitors through retargeting ads. I'm sure you're all very familiar with experiencing that when you go online and you search for something, and then all of a sudden your media, in your social media, you're getting ads on stuff. We're getting really good at that. Platforms that we utilize the most: Google, Facebook, and Instagram, TikTok, and Pinterest. You'll see in a little bit how TikTok has played a much larger role in that outreach. I'll highlight that we had more than 30 million impressions across all of our digital channels, approximately 3 times more than last year. So big improvement for us there. One other area of focus for us that we really stepped into this year was the idea around small market meeting areas. This is an area where we now have a few hotels that do have some meeting room space. And so we were very active in targeting this type of advertisement. We have seen some results on that. We will be spending more time on that as well, especially as Murrieta Hot Springs Resort comes online. You're going to see some different things. This is our kind of evergreen. These are content that we've had for some time, but we're able to actually reutilize it by utilizing different features, different filters, things of that sort. Here it gives you a couple of the different assets as far as the Super Bloom goes and some of the downloadable features that you can use. Restaurant Month was one of our Bandwango campaigns that we did at the end of last year. Beginning of this year in February, had huge success. And we actually, I think we've talked about that at a different meeting, but something that we're looking to do again this coming February. Something new we did was the Summer Trail Pass with Bandwango. So we encouraged people to take advantage of these amazing hiking trails that we have in our region, and then encourage them to pair that with going to one of our local restaurants or one of our local watering holes and take advantage of that. And they could earn points through that and redeem those for prizes and such. Here we get into the lovely data analytics aspects of it. I'm not going to go through a lot of this stuff because you can kind of read it when you want to or need to if you have questions on it. But most of these metrics are coming in really good and below what we had anticipated for cost-wise. So the first one here is obviously Facebook and Instagram. Next, we have all of our Google ads. These are more Google ads, and then our Pinterest performance. And then the good old world of TikTok. I'll talk about that in a second. I'll show you when we get into some of our best viewed pieces that we did. Our website in 2023, we did see a surge in our website traffic and engagement from over last year. So 82% of website users and the sessions were driven by paid social media. Which actually is not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That means we're in the right places in front of the right eyes. Social media on an overall basis, Explore Murrieta's social media channels saw an impressive increase in all metrics of engagement. 70% audience increase, 86% increase in engagements, 34% increase in impressions, and 87% increase in post-link clicks. And that's the one we want to see the most. Again, the California travel stories with Visit California and partnering with those, again, another aspect of what we continue to do, and we will leverage that as much as we possibly can. We have a great story that fits within everything that they're trying to target, and so we're having some great success. These are all stories and opportunities that we get that don't cost us anything, but leveraging the behemoth that is Visit California. So here's the fun one. Here's our top performing posts of the year. I will point out to you the third one over of the Facebook ones where it says Explore Murrieta in the image. That one garnered nearly 600,000 impressions. Just to the right of that on Instagram, we had, that was our best performed Instagram one at just over 10,000. The ironic thing on that, you notice on that it has Barrett Park in Murrieta, right? The funny thing this day was, this was earlier this year, not long after one of our big storms we had. And our plan was we were going up to the plateau that day. Well, the plateau was closed because it was still all mud. So we had to pivot very quickly. Thankfully, I reached out to Laura Frasso, who's my savior in so many different aspects, and she pointed us to a couple different parks. And I found out about Barrett Park, which is literally about, 4 blocks from my house, and never knew it was there. And it has a little creek that runs through it in the wintertime. It was absolutely unbelievable. If you've not been there, I'm gonna encourage you Just go there. It's great. It's amazing. Sorry. And then the third one is just below that. You'll see is our TikTok one that had nearly 600,000 impressions as well. So very active, very good social media content that we've been able to produce this year. Public relations is something we focused on a lot this year. Bigger emphasis, and it's really paid off. You'll see below there, we had 281 media placements, nearly 90 million estimated outlet readership viewerships, and then over 8 million estimated coverage views. I did get the opportunity to actually, during the Super Bloom campaign, we got noticed by our iHeartRadio, ended up doing an interview with iHeartRadio that ended up on a lot of their stations across the country when it came to this idea of sustainability in the travel and being a very good steward of our ecosystem. The next few slides are just some of the examples of some of the placements that we had. You can kind of look through those and peruse those when you get a chance. And then very quickly, for next year, 2024, our travel trends. This is kind of a synopsis of, you can read these and it gives you an idea of what the experts are saying of the trends for 2024. These are things that we look at and we consider when we do our planning for the year. The important part for you all to know is our planning and strategy for 2024. So as we kick off this year, some of the things that we're planning on is, and by the way, this is our 6th year as a destination marketing organization, so we were still fairly new. But in January, we're going to actually do a full planning workshop and strategic planning, which will help us with the destination vision, and then set up our marketing plan for the next couple of years. Our key focuses, like you see there on the right, obviously Murrieta Hot Springs Resort coming online in February is going to be a huge game changer for us as a destination, and for us as a marketing organization for Explore Murrieta. We do plan on a website redesign and redevelopment, evolving the campaign, and then just keeping expanding on our paid media channels that we've been doing that have been very effective, as you can see. And that is my presentation, and I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That was amazing. A lot of hits on all of those.
Maybe on a picture.
Love it. Any colleague questions, comments? No, seeing none. I guess you did an amazing job. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
Yes,
Thank
Explore
you.
Murrieta.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on to the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Seeing none?
Thank you so much. I'll call for a motion a second to approve our agenda this evening. Seeing we got that. Thank you, Ron. And Cindy. Motion passes 5-0. All right. Yeah, we got this is working good. Madam City Manager, administrative update tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. I have nothing this evening.
All right, thank you so much. Moving on to our governing body commission and committee reports. Governing body reports is an opportunity for the City Council to provide a brief report on conferences, seminars, and commission committees and board meetings in attendance. The report shall not exceed 3 minutes. Councilmember Warren will kick us off.
I did attend the budget implementation meeting with RCTC last Monday. A lot of good topics were discussed and are being brought forward to the commission. And that concludes my report.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Warren. Councilmember Lavelle.
I have no updates. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I did attend the RCA meeting yesterday in Riverside. There was nothing to report from there except for I did have a meeting with Ann Mayer and Aaron Hake earlier this week at City Hall. Ann Mayer is retiring, and from that, both RCA and RCTC, because same staff handles both agencies. And Aaron Hake has been nominated to be the new executive director, and I found them both amazing, gave me a lot of history about the MSHCP. Some of it I had, some of it I did not. And I did not attend my Western Regional Council of Governments meeting at the last minute because they had a closed session. I was going to run late, and I had a Santa stop to be to.
Oh, well,
That's my report.
thank you so much, Councilmember Holliday. Mayor Pro Tem Stone.
I have nothing at this time to report. Thank you.
Thank you, and I as well have nothing to report out. So moving on to public comments of non-agendized items. Madam City Clerk, I see we have a list.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Any person may address the governing bodies on any subject pertaining to city business. Normally, no action may be considered or taken by the governing bodies on any matter not listed on the agenda. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. Tricia Hatterley. Tricia Hatterley, going once.
Tricia.
Twice. Okay. Shane DeLisi.
All right, Shane, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Appreciate you guys having me again and the opportunity. Been able to talk with a couple of you, which has been great. Obviously tonight, once again, just want this to be for the glory of God and for who He is. God loves life and hates murder, and it's so good that you who oversee Murrieta, and God has given you these positions according to His authority, but that you guys love life and that your heart is to protect Murrieta residents in the city of Murrieta, and you care about life deeply. And you say that we have one of the safest cities in the nation. Man, I take pride in that because our family has enjoyed Murrieta for the past 17 and a half years we've lived here. I would like to bring it to your attention that maybe as we have one of the safest cities for those outside of the womb in the nation, because you and others have allowed Planned Parenthood to be in our city now, we have one of the least safest cities in the nation for those inside the womb. So my question for you tonight is, what is it that you guys have to answer? Not tonight, of course, because you cannot answer that right here, but what is it in the womb? And that goes for everyone here tonight. What is it? If it truly is indeed a human being, because it is growing at the time of conception, a baby in the womb, then we have murder happening in our city daily by pill after pill or by dismemberment. There's not a greater one of those either. They're both horrible. I've been wanting to grow and take the next step in my process of being a resident here in Murrieta. I hate Planned Parenthood and what they stand for because God hates murder outside and inside the womb. So I've been standing out on the sidewalk there, standing for life in our city. I want to put my money where my mouth is. If God hates murder, and I'm so grateful and thankful for our police and our fire, and even hearing tonight all the wonderful things that our city does to keep our residents safe. I just have a big issue. We're not keeping some of our residents safe within the womb. And they're residents to Murrieta. We had one of our people from church who witnessed a murder, and a woman who was murdered, and she had a baby inside. And what does the newspaper have to report? 2 people died. 2 people died. There was a double homicide from one woman dying with a baby inside the womb. Just some things to think about. So the question is tonight, what is it?
Thank you, sir.
Amy Edgeworth.
Hello, I'm
Amy.
changing it up and I have a poem for you this evening. 'Twas the night before city council and all was calm and bright when here she goes again talking about the Murrieta train project with you tonight. And trust me, I could tell you so much more that bridges the present to the past. I could share stories from my grandpa that would knock you off your chairs. Like the one time Grandpa laughed at me just for wearing plaid pants, or the countless time he drove 4 kids all the way to Tustin just for dance. But I should be talking about myself to you, which is awkward, I confess. I'd rather talk about my great-grandma Josie, one of the first female horse trainers in California. But once again, I digress. And I've stood up here 3 times before. Hey, are you talking about me yet? Don't you want to set up a meeting and see how far we can get? Do you want to know what I've been up to? It's sure to get you grinning, because I'm serious about bringing a train to Murrieta, and it's just the beginning. It's a unique cultural arts center, and Murrieta's first. It really is a great idea, if you ask me. I mean, I'm sure you've heard worse. With the new year around the corner and a train car that needs a home, what do I gotta do to get your support to further this project along? If my grandpa were here, I bet he'd share a funny story of his great Aunt Pearl and her younger sister Ori. He'd talk of his own grandpa, of his ma and his pa. He'd share all kinds of punny jokes about what Arkansas. Or maybe he'd just tell you to let the words of Mark Twain guide your way. Go out on a limb, that's where the fruit is, he'd say. So this fruit is serious, despite the humorous tone, in asking for your support in making this a priority, because Pearl can't do this alone. Alas, dear City Council, I know that what I'm really asking for is a meeting and a green light that says go. And I thank you, council members, for considering this plea of community, of art, and of our shared history. Because bringing history and art to life is what I like to say, and being connected by community is the only way. Thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing. And an
Joy?
applause as well. All right.
Joy?
Welcome, Joy.
Good evening, council members and city manager. Just a couple of things I would just appreciate your ear on today. As a resident nearby, I love our market night events. When they started, it seemed so lovely how it brought community together and seemed to really showcase local talent. I'm not sure what happened, but it seems like it's getting out of control. And it feels like, in some ways, it's resembling like a flea market. Not highlighting some of our greatest artists and talent in a number of ways. Additionally, as a near resident who is a pedestrian, I've lost count of the number of times I've almost been hit by people who seem to think that stop signs are suggestions. I'm not sure how we address this, but I would appreciate your insightful wisdom, attention to that. Traffic and litter are an issue, and those of us who live here are hit most. I love that people are coming in and love the attention. It's charming to our town, and I love celebrating the whimsy that can be brought forth, but it's disappointing to feel like those of us who live here are not really considered. Two other things, that's the noise. Goodness. Used to be lovely. A lovely gal would play harp. You could hear her and walk a few feet and hear John Crutchfield, a beautiful musician, and then a few feet away, somebody else. Now we've got a clashing. It sounds like a battle of bands. The noise is so overwhelming. I'm running out of time, but I would just appreciate some kind attention to those of us who are impacted by this as well. Other things I will just wait to address on another day. Thank you for your ear tonight.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That concludes public comments.
Thank you so very much, Madam City Clerk. We're moving on to the consent calendar. Approval of items 1 through 13. Items on the consent calendar are considered routine and may be enacted by one motion and vote. There will be no discussion of these items unless specific items are removed from the consent calendar for a separate motion. Are there any requests from the City Council to pull any consent calendar item for discussion or abstention from voting?
Are you calling me? Okay. Madam City Clerk, I'd like to recuse myself from item 13, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor Pro Tem, and that is
Madam City Clerk, it's because I have an investment property within 500 feet. Thank you
so much.
Madam City Clerk, are there any members of the public requesting to speak on a consent calendar item?
Seeing none.
Call for a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar item.
Motion and a second. Motion carries 5-0 with Councilmember Stone recusing herself from item number 13.
Thank you so much. Fiscal year 2022-2023 year-end report and approval appropriations for carryover of unspent amounts from 2022, 2023 to 2023, 2024. Hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you. I know all those numbers are a mouthful. I try to cut off the first number just to make it less, but that's just me. Okay. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of City Council. I'm Jennifer Terry, Finance Manager, and with me tonight is Giovanni Calvopina, Financial Analyst. The objective of tonight's report is to update City Council, staff, and residents with the year-end results for fiscal year 22-23. We are in the final stages of our external audit and do not foresee any significant deviations from the information presented tonight. This report includes a summary of fiscal year 23 year-end financial activities for all funds, including the estimated ending fund balances for General Fund and Measure T. We are proposing to appropriate a portion of available unassigned fund balance for Measure T. Also included in this report is a request to carry over the unspent budgets for certain obligations. At the end of the presentation, we'll provide a timeline for future budget updates. This is a summary of the citywide results for fiscal year 23. Total revenues totaled $204.5 million. We received $23 million over the amended budget, or 13%. Expenditures totaled just over $168.6 million, which was $938,000 under the amended budget, or 1%. From a citywide perspective, it appears there is a substantial positive contribution to fund balance of $35.9 million. However, we collect revenues for development impact fees, Measure A, SB1, and gas taxes, which are received for the sole purpose of funding future capital improvement projects. Revenues for these CIP projects are included in the operating budget as shown as part of the total revenue, but the expenditures are budgeted on the separate CIP budget. This may show an excess of revenues going into fund balance, but it is, in most cases, already spoken for future CIP projects. Whoops. We collected approximately $23 million in revenue to be used for those CIP, future CIP projects. So taking away that $23 million out of that 35, that leaves us with $13 million. I'll now turn the presentation over to Giovanni to provide an overview of the final revenues and expenditures to discuss the fiscal year 22 carryovers.
Thank you, Jennifer. I will cover the revenue, expenditure, and carryover part of the presentation, starting with revenues. The city has used conservative revenue projections to maintain a positive financial position. In fiscal year 22-23, the city collected $204.5 million in revenues, which was 13% over the amended budget, with the major revenue categories being sales tax, other miscellaneous revenues, property taxes, and special taxes. It should be noted that the difference between transfers in and transfers out, which will be discussed on the expenditure slide, is $1.5 million. This is attributed to funds that were moved to unavailable revenue associated with the Housing Authority. We will now provide a detailed information for each one of the city's major revenue sources, starting with sales tax. This category is divided into two components: Bradley Burns, also known as sales and use tax, and Measure T, a voter-approved 1% sales tax. This graph displays the sales tax receipts for the past 4 years. Bradley Burns in blue increased by 3%, or approximately $761,000 from the previous year. Measure T in orange increased by less than 1%, or around $30,000 from the previous year. Bradley Burns receipts totaled $27 million, and Measure T receipts were $28 million in fiscal year 22-23. This table shows the other three major revenue sources for the city. Other miscellaneous revenues consist mostly of developer impact fees, federal and state reimbursements, and other revenues such as interest earnings. This category's revenues increased by 85% compared to the previous year, ending the year at $38.7 million, or 9% over budget, making it the second biggest revenue source for the city in fiscal year 22-23. The over budget and revenue can be attributed to the better than anticipated interest earnings and development impact fees. At the end of the year, property taxes collected were $31.6 million, which was 14% over budget, and this is still 2% higher than the previous year. This was due to the conservative approach taken while projecting property tax revenues. The increase of 2% from the previous year is in line with ad valorem tax and suggests that there has been no significant change in the value of homes. Finally, the city had to recognize $9.5 million in special tax this year due to Government Accounting Standards Board, also known as GASB, Statement 91. These taxes are collected from properties within the Community's Facilities Districts, or CFDs, also known as Melrose Districts, to fund the annual debt service on the bonds. The CFDs were formed to fund the acquisition of public facilities in connection with new construction. We will now move on to the expenditure discussion. In fiscal year 22-23, the city spent $168.6 million, which was 1% under the amended budget. The most significant cost drivers being personnel, operations and maintenance, or O&M, and capital outlay. Personnel cost ended the year 1% under the amended budget, and more details about this specific category will be discussed on the next slide. Operations and maintenance ended the year 6% under the amended budget, which is equivalent to $3.3 million. It's important to note that out of the 3.3, 2.9 million is requested to be carried over into fiscal year 23-24. Compared to the previous year, this category also increased by 22%, mainly due to the rising cost of contract services and demand. The capital outlay expenditures exceeded the amended budget by 11% due to CIP expenditures not being budgeted in the operating budget, but in a separate ledger called the capital budget. Some of these expenditures were for construction, furniture and fixtures, and software and intangible assets for projects like City Hall, the Veterans Memorial, and pavement resurfacing. It's essential to review the primary expenditure cost driver for the city, which is personnel cost. This category is comprised of salaries, wages, and benefits. To meet the needs of the community, the city has had to incur higher costs for personnel over the years. This graph displays the annual personnel costs and authorized number of full-time employees, or FTEs, for each fiscal year. The number of personnel has increased by 2% each year for fiscal years 22 and 23, whereas fiscal year 24, the increase was 4%. From fiscal year 21 to 22, the city experienced an 8% increase in cost. From fiscal year 22 to 23, an 11% increase. And from fiscal year 23 to the amended budget fiscal year 24, the city is expected to experience an 15% increase, mainly due to the total number of FTEs. It is also important to mention that benefits have also played a role in the increased cost, with the most significant being CalPERS pension and workers' compensation. The last slide that I will be covering today is the carryover request. As mentioned in one of the previous slides, tonight's actions include the request to carry over fiscal year 22-23 budget appropriations to fiscal year 23-24. Most of the PO requested carryovers are related to CIP projects at $6.8 million, while the remaining 30%, or $2.9 million, are for operations. Apart from the PO carryovers, some budget-only carryovers are not associated with POs. These budget-only carryovers include $3.9 million in revenue, which is all grant-related, and $4.2 million in expenditures. Out of these expenditures, $3.8 million are related to grants, and only $471,000 are for one-time expenditures, such as vehicles, furniture, and contract services. You could find a detailed list of all the carryovers in attachment 3 of the agenda report. And I will turn the presentation back to Jennifer.
Thank you. We'll go over the changes in unassigned fund balance. The first column here represents the beginning unassigned balance for the fiscal year. The second column is the ending fund balance, and the final column is the change in unassigned fund balance. The general fund contributed $10.7 million, and Measure T contributed $8.2 million into unassigned fund balance. At year end, we true up fire and CFD funds to have a zero unassigned fund balance. However, we had a few last-minute journals affecting their ending balances. We will true up the unassigned fund balance for both fire and CSD as part of the upcoming mid-year budget update. The library fund will continue to draw down on the remaining unassigned fund balance until depleted. Then any negative variances between revenues and expenditures will be fully supported by Measure T, similar to the CSD and fire. As alluded to in the first quarter budget update presented 2 weeks ago, the general fund and Measure T ended better than we expected. The middle column in the table to the right shows the projected contribution to unassigned fund balance, and the final column is the fiscal year end result. We anticipated that the general fund would have an excess of $280,000 at the end of the fiscal year. However, higher than expected revenues and budgetary savings resulted in a contribution of $10.6 million to unassigned fund balance. A portion of these savings will fund the carryover requests Giovanni discussed earlier. And then we will propose the allocation of the remaining general fund year-end savings as part of the mid-year budget update. Measure T contributed $5.2 million, more than we anticipated, and tonight staff is proposing to allocate $1.2 million into the economic contingency reserve that can be used to address financial impacts resulting from changes in the economy, $4 million to the continuing operations reserves to fund the balance of the approved public safety labor group MOUs, and the balance of the $238,000 will remain in unassigned fund balance. Future budget updates for fiscal year 23-24 include mid-year budget update is slated for the second meeting of February. The third quarter budget update will be the second meeting of May. And then a year from now, we will bring forward the fourth quarter or year-end budget update in December. The presentation of the completed annual Comprehensive Financial Report, also known as ACFR, is scheduled for the second meeting in February. And then the results of the single audit will follow shortly thereafter and be presented in April. Tonight's recommended actions include to accept this year-end budget update report, amend the fiscal year 23-24 operating budget to include the fiscal year 22-23 rollovers, and appropriate unassigned fund balance from Measure T. And this concludes our presentation and are available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much for that very transparent, very clear, easy to understand financials. So we appreciate your time going through that so eloquently. So anybody, I see no one, no comments. All right. Well, you must be just amazing at your job, which we already know. So no comments from the dais. So thank you so much and appreciate your time this evening. All right. So, Madam City Clerk, are there any public comments regarding this discussion item?
Seeing none.
Seeing none. Moving on for any discussions, going once, going twice on the dais. All right, I can call for a motion in a second. And could we have the vote, please?
Motion carries unanimously 5-0.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Moving on to citywide records management program update and adoption of records retention schedule. We've got the city clerk down there tonight.
Who is that behind me?
Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council. In full transparency, I'm a little under the weather and I've taken a whole lot of cold medication, so we'll start with that. So today we're going to be talking about the citywide records management program, and more specifically an update to the adoption of a records retention schedule. With me, I will let her introduce herself.
Good evening. My name is Angela Martin Vanderbon, and I am the newest addition to the city clerk's office, and I am the records manager for the city. Welcome.
So the information was provided in the agenda report, and we tried to be as comprehensive as we could. And so my goal right now is to simplify it and not make it as boring as it can be to some. So I'm going to try and make it as painless as possible. So records management, just for your reference, it is really important that the city clerk is compliant based off of various regulations and laws. And so I've identified a couple up there on the PowerPoint so you'd get a better understanding of what it is that I need to follow, from the California Secretary of State to the International Institute of Municipal Clerks, which is the association that designates me as a certified municipal clerk. So I thought I would outline it basically before and after. And what I mean by that is, what does records management look like for the city of Murrieta from 91 to 2020 before I got here, and then what it looks like after. So in 91, they had some great successes, right? They implemented a program, including a filing system. They did establish a records retention schedule. They adopted a council policy that gave clear direction to staff. There was a paperless initiative, and they did implement a records request portal online for the community and the public. They had some challenges. Staff turnover is common, conflicting and inadequate policies, competing priorities, limited resources, and lack of an inventory. And so there's a little photo there of, you know, the records room back prior to 2021. And then we're gonna move on to, you know, 2021 to present. And the goal here is for me just to kind of identify current successes, right? And I am a strong believer in, you know, the right people have to be on the seat, right? And so it is because of Madam City Manager, our city attorney, Tiffany, and the executive team, whom I'm so grateful for, because you don't get that in a lot of agencies when it comes to records, and I've really had everybody's support. So to me, that is actually a success. Another success is you all get me. I've had 17 years of records management experience. That's designated specifically for local government records. So you're welcome. And then also we've done it. This is a cold medicine. We've done a department reorg, you know, reorg in the clerk's office. I've included a records manager with Angela, and she's actually had about 13 years of general records management experience, so she's experienced. And then we also have 2 project-based temporary employees, and they have been critical to our successes, and they have assisted with city staff training and assistance, so there's that. We've also we started an inventory of the 30 years worth of records that the city currently retains. And we are using the Public Records Act request portal in a way that is usable. It's not where it needs to be, but it is a good start. And then there are my challenges, right? I had to review everything. I had to talk to Kim, get a game plan, figure out what they did in the past, what they didn't do. We don't have records accessible in a manner in which they really should be. And so obviously that's what we're moving towards. Substandard compliance, that's a big one for me. That's a big challenge. Organizational detachment, what that means is a lot of agencies, local government specifically, records are records. They just kind of, we'll get to it later. You have, you know, budget, public safety, things of that nature. So records tends to get put, you know, to the side and never really dealt with. So that's a challenge for me here. And then of course, costs. So a records retention schedule, it's really a policy document. It defines and tells us what we can and can't do with records based off of laws and regulations. It's amended as needed, which the city was doing, but really every 5 years, each agency should be adopting a new records retention schedule. So we're a little overdue, but we're here today, and that's great. The benefits is it minimizes risk, eliminates duplicity, things of that nature, storage, electronic or paper. It eliminates a lot of unnecessary storage, and it's really important because it does provide clear guidance to city staff. And I think that is relevant. So regarding the records retention schedule, this is just a quick look so you all can see our efforts when it comes to the records retention schedule. You'll see in January of this year, we kicked it off. January to May, we met with all the departments. There was a ton of coordination and collaboration with every department. In May, our city attorney's office started on a rolling review. They started reviewing and ensuring that it was all compliant and legal. June through September, the executive team at their level, they all reviewed it and verified and approved it. In September, after conferring with the city manager, I was able to make some determinations. It's called an administrative decision. And then November, we finalized it, and here we are today presenting it to this council for adoption. And I think I'm going to ask Angela to chime in.
Thank you, City Clerk. Now I will move forward by mentioning some notable changes in retention periods. You were provided a chart in the agenda report, but I think these are important to mention for council and community transparency. So first, I will start with non-infrastructure contracts. The retention was permanent, and now it will be completion plus 10 years. I will mention, though, that infrastructure contracts will remain permanent. Building plans, which are residential and appurtenances, beginning in 2023, they will be retained for 10 years instead of permanent. Employee W-2s, they were retained for 20 years, and now they will be retained for 5 years. Mylars, which are also known as as-builts, which are large format drawings, the retention will stay the same, so they will still be permanent. However, the paper document will be destroyed after 15 years once it's been imaged and quality checked. Planning landscaping plans were previously kept permanent, and now the new retention would be 15 years. Commission applications, they were kept for permanent, now they will be kept for 2 years. As mentioned previously, all these changes are legally compliant. Okay. So next, I will talk about where we're moving towards, which is information governance. An up-to-date retention schedule is fundamental for attaining information governance. In April, the city clerk provided an update on this very topic, so this will be a quick review. So what is information governance? Information governance establishes the authorities, the processes, and the infrastructure to enable information to be a useful asset and to reduce liability. The 4 pillars of information governance are retention, compliance, policies and procedures, and an electronic content management system. Some examples of the benefits of information governance are accessibility, standardization, preservation, automation, and cost savings. So with that, I will hand it back over to our city clerk.
So, City Council, so in closing, I just had, this is something that my team came up with actually probably about 6 months ago, and it's really goals when it comes to records management. But I'd like to remind you that this is in alignment with the City Council goals, specifically to maintain a high-performing organization that values fiscal sustainability, transparency, accountability, and organizational efficiency. We believe we are on the right track to do that. And with that, I am seeking for this council to adopt Resolution 23-4719 and direct the city clerk to develop a records management administrative policy upon approval of such resolution. And Angela and I are here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Angela and Madam City Clerk. I see that we have a question coming from Councilmember Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Great job, great report, as always. I did have one question and maybe 2 questions. In your chart that you gave us on the videos for commission, it says that it's with the exception of Planning Commission, but I didn't see a line item for what the Planning Commission is. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, so in the records retention schedule, the Planning Commission is permanent.
Permanent?
Yes.
Why is that one different?
It's different because of the type of body that it is. And also, we're changing. We have shifted to action minutes for Planning Commission and for City Council as well. And with that came the commitment that we retain the videos.
Understood.
Permanently, yes.
And the other one's more of a discussion. Building plans, I know for the residents, sometimes they'll come in 15, 20 years later after, they may have just bought the house and they want to do a remodel and they come to the city looking for the tract building plans, and a lot of cities don't keep those longer than they have to. It's really a customer service question. Are we keeping those via paper or electronic?
Electronic. So, yes, currently they're electronic as of the beginning of this year.
Is there a significant cost to keep those permanently, or?
Crystal?
So, yeah, there's a cost to everything, right? And so there is significant cost on prior plans because they are paper, believe it or not. Prior to 2023, it's all paper. And so it's imaging them if we need to, it's searching for them, it's a liability, it's a risk. What we do intend to do, which I failed to mention, was because we are shifting the retention, we're going to be doing a public outreach and give folks enough time to come in and get their plans. Like if you own a home and you need a plan, I forget the time frame we were gonna do, but we were gonna give it at least 6 months. So we really won't start destroying anything until after that, but we're gonna do I've talked to Development Services, we're gonna put it on the permit form to try and get people to come and get their plans now before we start destroying, because it is a lot of paper and it is a lot of storage.
No, and the paper plans, I certainly understand. It's costly, costs space costs money, for sure. But obviously that doesn't, and there's probably nothing we can do about it. It doesn't solve the problem for the person that buys a home 2 years from now and then comes in and says, hey, do you have plans? And I'm like, sorry, they were paper. Would it make sense, would it be possible to have a dual policy for building plans that says if they were paper, they're kept for that many years, but if they're electronic, we keep them permanently? There's not a significant cost to the electronic storage.
Well, there's a cost when it comes to when we get requests, and I don't want to elaborate too much into it, but by us retaining the records when the law does not require us to, and we're doing it for so long, it just means that we have to search for those, we have to be liable for them, and it can be a risk. And so it's just, there's that component that really is a struggle when you are dealing with about 800 Public Records Act requests a year. And so that's really something too that we have to be cognizant of when it comes to retaining things or over-retaining things.
Understood. Do you get many or any public records requests for building plans?
We do.
You do.
And, but I have to be honest, a lot of the times we cannot locate them or we cannot get the authorization from the architect. And so it has been a lot of time and energy trying to get plans that either we cannot find or we can't get the authority to disclose.
Understood, 'cause
Unfortunately.
That's right. You do have to get the architect to sign off before you can release them to the homeowner.
Yes,
And
sir.
that falls on the city to do?
It does.
Basically, your department.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Holliday, one of the things that is important to remember, all of these are best practices, and there's a lot of cities that have done this a long time ago. And so we are kind of drowning in 30 years of paper. That the biggest issue is they're not retrievable. And so our goal is to have things digital, but we have to focus on that group. So we have to let go of the ones that we're not legally required to as well. So that's just another piece of it.
Thank you, Councilmember Holliday. I just have a question. As you're going through all of the paper records, are we finding many historical documents that we need to save and archive?
Not necessarily. We do have historical records that, before I came, they did a really good job of retaining them. And Kim actually has her hands in a lot of it because she wants to make sure that we are retaining the historical records, which are different, right, than the regular day-to-day permits, W-2s, plans, things of that nature. So yeah, if we come across something that is deemed historical, we will retain it permanently.
Well, thank you.
But I haven't come across
Anything.
anything specific, no.
Thank you.
Not yet.
And so like medical records, after 27 years in business, I have 2 storage containers that need to be cleaned out on a regular basis. But they will be shredded, everything will be shredded then, is that correct?
That is correct.
We're
So
not
they'll
gonna-
go through a proper destruction process, which means the city manager, the department head, myself, and the city attorney will approve it. And then we have a certified shred-it company come and shred them on site, and then they certify that and provide that to me as a permanent record.
Well, thank you so much. This is a huge task. Thank you for taking so much time to do it. And I'm glad we've been able to provide you with some new software and techniques in order to do it. So thank you so much for your report. Seeing no other questions, I'll move to Madam City Clerk. Are there any public comments regarding this discussion item?
Seeing none.
Thank you so much. Councilmember, any last comments? All right, I'll call for a motion and a second.
Motion carries unanimously, 5-0.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Moving on to item number 16, amended and restated Community Facilities District goals and policies. Staff, didn't we just talk about this?
Good evening, Mayor, council members, we're back.
Welcome.
This item is the amended and restated Community Facilities District goals and policies. Because this is very closely related to the workshop item, staff does not have a presentation on this one. However, we are available to answer questions. And I just want to let you know the substantive differences in the proposed policy. To reiterate those again, would be allowing development impact fees to be financed through the CFD, and then the escalators that are in for both services and facilities. So with that, staff's recommendation is that your council adopt a resolution adopting an amended and restated Community Facilities District goals and policies. And again, we are available to answer questions.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the dais? I see none. Madam City Clerk, are there any public comments regarding this item or discussion?
Casson Klein.
One never miss an opportunity.
Welcome again.
But I will be brief. So just please consider what I spoke about, my comments on the, at the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Casson.
Wow.
Alan Long.
That is a record, so. Alan?
No. Sit down.
All right, thank you, Alan.
Dan Lee.
One more time, Dan.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this topic. I did want to address one of Councilman Holliday's comments or questions that he had in regards to the low number of CFDs that were formed, late in the recession. And one of the responses that CBI teamed up with the State Construction Infrastructure Program, the SCIP program, that they utilized that SCIP program to kind of fill the gap of a lot of cities that were very nervous at that time in forming CFDs. They came together and they formed a pool of assets. And so SCIP program that would be a project in Murrieta would combine with one from Petaluma, that would combine with one from Livermore, and they pulled all those together. And during that time, that's how a lot of the uncertainty of the great financial crisis, that gap was bridged. So I wanted to address that issue and request that I believe, and I'm not totally clear, maybe the city manager could let us know if the city has adopted a resolution for the State Construction Infrastructure Program also for Melrose. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
That concludes public comments.
All right, moving back to council members' discussion. Ivan, would you address that question?
The city is a member of SCIP, and since I've been here, I've seen several projects come through that have utilized SCIP financing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Holler. Any of my fellow colleagues? Councilmember Holliday.
So if a agency or a developer uses a SCIP program, are they precluded from doing a CFD then?
I see Brian Forbath coming up here for that.
Good evening, council members back. The SCIP program is a CFD. I mean, essentially it's a CFD or an assessment district, the way they do it. And the difference is that, again, that's the city relinquishing control to outside forces to do it. The SCIP program forms the CFD, the city participates in it. They'll finance a combination of city infrastructure, or city fees, or whatever. But again, the city's not in control of the process. It's, yeah.
And it's the same limitations as a CFD? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lee, for that information. It was appreciated.
All right. Seeing no other discussions, we'll move and second. And then call for a vote.
Motion carries unanimously, 5-0.
Thank you so much. Moving on to notifications, final parcel map, PM 37185, Murrieta 2 Multifamily LLC. Madam City Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to note for the record, the notification that was posted had the numbers transposed. The final parcel map number of 37185 when it should have been 38185. And with that, notice is given to the City Council. An application was filed by Murrieta 2 Family LLC, a Delaware limited liability company, for tentative parcel map number 38185 to subdivide 28.9 acres into 2 parcels for multifamily development. Included with the development are 453 apartments. Engineering staff has completed a review of the final map for conformance with the Subdivision Mapped Act and the Murrieta Municipal Code. Final parcel map PM 38185 conforms to the conditions of approval and the tentative parcel map. All dedications and mitigation required in the conditions of approval have been offered and secured.
Thank you so much for that update, Madam City Clerk. Moving on to Governing Board announcements. Governing Board announcements, opportunity for the City Council to provide miscellaneous reports and announcements. Announcements shall not exceed 2 minutes. The City Clerk will use the computerized timer. And to start us off, Councilmember Warren.
Thank you, Mayor. I defer until our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Lavelle.
Thank you. Mine will be brief. It really just an augment from last time I attended the Temecula Valley NAMI conference, so National Association of Mental Illness. Just had pictures. They had posted these on the website, and I grabbed them and threw them up here, so you guys can, for your viewing pleasure, me and Mayor Pro Tem Stone. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great pictures, Councilmember Lavelle. Councilmember Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I caught up on my governing body announcements from last time, so there's a whole list of them on there. The only one that I'm going to talk about tonight is we had our first Santa Stop runs last night in the city of Murrieta since 3 years ago, since COVID happened. And on my route, we had, I believe it was 442 people that came out to the 5 stops that we stopped on. I know our mayor had a pretty large turnout on hers. Councilmember Warren has some catching up to do. But
That's all right.
keep count. We'll have an award at the end. So they're continuing tonight. They might be still going on for a little bit. And then Wednesday and Thursday of this week, and then Monday through Thursday next week, praying we don't get rain so we can stay on schedule. But if you haven't found yours, go to murrietaca.gov/Santa, and you can even track Santa as Santa is driving through town. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Holliday. And we were tracking Santa as we were on the trolley, so that was kind of fun. Mayor Pro Tem Stone.
I will defer my governing body announcements to our next council meeting, but I did want to announce that when I got to City Hall, Rosa presented me with an award. And it was in recognition of the Teen Mom Charities Miracle Award out in the desert, and Congressman Ruiz and Assembly Member Greg Wallace gave me certificates for my advocacy for homelessness. And so it was a shock, and I really, really appreciated it. And I just wanted to say thank you so much to the Teen Mom Charities Miracle Committee. So thank you so much.
Congratulations, Mayor Pro Tem. And they also gave me a call just now, and they would like a picture of you tonight, if you could do that for them and send that to them. So they were very excited that there was a council meeting tonight. So I will defer my announcements as well. And moving on to council member requests to add items to future agendas. Now is the time for council members' requests to add items to future agendas. There will be no discussion on the requests. A brief explanation of the request may be given. The merit of the item being requested may not be discussed or debated. Now, are there any requests from any of my colleagues? Seeing none. All right. All right, so moving on to adjournment of our regular meeting. So I would like to adjourn the regular meeting of the Murrieta City Council. And I'd like to reconvene the special meeting of the closed session of the City of Murrieta. Madam City Attorney, could you please report out from closed session?
Thank you, Mayor. The City Council met in closed session on one item pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2 because there's significant exposure to litigation in one case. The council was updated and discussed the item, and there's no reportable action. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam City Attorney. And I will now adjourn our special meeting. And thanks to the Scout Troop for coming tonight. We appreciate you being here. And everyone else, it looks like there's a lot of students here tonight. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate you sitting through a long meeting.